Hey, have you ever been to the Bates Motel?
You mean an institution? A madhouse?
I hear it's really quite nice in the summer. Coming up is my summary and analysis of one of the most famous movies ever made. It's Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 horror classic, Psycho. Coming up next. Look, so much has been written about Psycho that I'm going to do something a little bit different in this video. Usually I do a quick plot summary and then give an analysis that doesn't contain any spoilers. But this movie Psycho is so famous and so watched that I think in the last half of the video that I'm going to give you an analysis with several spoilers in them. So about midway through this video I'll tell you spoilers are coming. And even if you've never watched this movie, you've probably heard of the shower scene in this movie, very famous. And you've heard of the Bates Motel, very likely.
Oh, we have 12 vacancies. 12 cabins, 12 vacancies.
So Psycho is a movie to me about transgressions, perversions, and subversions. Alfred Hitchcock was particularly interested, I think, in the question of perversion. And on the one hand, making movies for popular audiences worldwide. But on the other hand, introducing them to the actual perversions that are within them, their drives and their desires and their will. Whether Hitchcock was drawing from the Freudianism of the time, academic psychology, or whether he was drawing from Roman Catholicism, guilt and original sin in particular, or some mix of both, Psycho really gets to the heart of a lot of Hitchcock's ideas about perversion. And one thing he knows is that not only are the characters in the stories perverted because they're based on real human beings, but the audiences who watch and who want something from his films are also that way. They desire sex, they desire nudity, they desire death, they desire murder. So you gotta watch Hitchcock knowing that he knows that and he's going to play to it and mess with you. Psycho really nails that. It opens with a skyline of Phoenix, Arizona. The camera pans right, then it goes into a window. Several cuts into an interior hotel room where two lovers are meeting up. And they're both semi-nude, they're both sexual objects of desire. We're gonna follow both of them in this movie. First, we're gonna follow the Janet Leigh character. She wants to marry this half-naked man in the hotel room, but he has too much debt owing to his ex-wife. So she works for a real estate guru and she ends up absconding with $40,000. She decides to take that $40,000 and run away with it in order to, I think she hopes, to marry this half-naked man we see at the beginning of the movie. She seems like a really nice, wonderful woman at first, but that's only appearances. And that's what I'm talking about with Hitchcock and perversion. Even the people who look the best, seem the nicest, really aren't at heart. That, my friends, is the Christian doctrine of original sin. That also is Freud's idea of the buried id and ego. So anyway, she drives and drives and drives, thinking about how great she is that she stole $40,000, but also, of course, feeling guilty and responsible for it.
I'll track her, never you doubt it.
Oh, hold on, Cass. I still can't believe it must be some kind of a mystery.
She stops at a rural motel. It has vacancy, and this is a dark and stormy night. She meets a very nice man, Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins. He ends up inviting her to dinner. They have a conversation. It's at once nice, but it's also creepy. And Anthony Perkins is probably one of the most perfectly cast actors ever in this role, one of the reasons why it's famous. Now, this character of Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, decides after this conversation with Norman Bates that, you know what, she should not have stolen the $40,000. She decides, the next day she's going to go back home and give it back. But before she can do that, oops, shower scene. Yes, in fact, in the middle of the movie, she's killed at the motel room in the shower. Question is, who is the killer? Now that's all I'll need to say for the first time viewers. And if you've never seen this movie, stop right here. Here come the spoilers. But of course the character who kills her is Norman Bates. And Norman Bates wearing a granny costume. Now here's a true confession. I've seen this movie twice. The first time I saw it was in 8th grade, 13 years old. Our English teacher in high school made us watch this movie. In retrospect, that is a absolutely bizarre choice. Because I'm not sure what 13-year-old can understand this movie or appreciate it. In fact, my view of this movie was it's long, slow, and boring, and I don't understand why a man in a grandma costume is killing beautiful women in a motel room. That is not what you do to beautiful women in motel rooms. So over 20 years later, after reading a lot of crime noir, after watching a lot of film noir, after watching almost all of Hitchcock's movies, I finally returned to Psycho. and I thought I probably wouldn't like it. Turns out I think it is totally brilliant. I have to agree with the masses on this, even though, sometimes I really don't want to agree with the masses. This is a legitimately great movie, and I think one of the things that makes it great is Bernard Herrmann's musical score. Probably one of the best musical scores, if not the best musical score ever written for a movie. So anyway, I can only give you a little bit of analysis in this shorter video. I think this movie, as I said at the beginning, is about perversions. It's also about subversions. Clearly this movie is about subverting plot expectations on behalf of modern viewers, that is in 1960, even modern readers of books. Now, at this point in time, people are still readers, and mystery novels, crime novels are at the top of the genre sales for all books. Also, romance novels as well. And I think that's generally still the case. So, this movie combines romance, horror, and mystery and crime. But, the Janet Leigh character, she was a famous actress at this time, and then to kill her off in the middle of the movie, as most people know, is something Hitchcock is doing to subvert his audience's expectations. Why are you killing the female lead, or the apparent female lead, in the middle of this movie? But the thing that actually really got me here rewatching this movie was that the detective was killed. I think most writers, movie makers would have had the detective come after the Janet Leigh character is killed, and then he would solve the crime. You expect the detective to be the hero of the story. But very quickly he shows up at the Bates Motel and he's killed too. And then what happens? Another subversion of expectations. We return to the half-naked man in the motel room at the beginning of the movie. He comes into the movie later on. And with the sister of Marion Crane, they both go to investigate what's going on at the Bates Motel since the detective didn't come back. Here Hitchcock is really messing with us because he's giving us another hint of perversion, perhaps adultery. I don't think it happens, but the hint of it, maybe the want of it on behalf of the audience between these two characters. And then finally, by the end of the movie, you have this full turn to the fact that Norman Bates all along has been the main character. In other words, this movie has taken us from this nice, beautiful blonde woman, Janet Leigh, seeming prim and proper, going from being half naked in a hotel room to, by the end, Norman Bates in a jail cell staring at you, the camera. I think people watching this today still wouldn't expect what happens in this movie. What I notice this time is 4 major faces. Extreme close shots of 4 different characters. It's just striking to me, put them all 4 together, what Hitchcock is getting at. Beginning of the movie, as I said, the Janet Leigh character, Marion Crane. Beautiful face. End of the movie, Norman Bates, horrific face. And that fade out before the final shot in the movie seems to have a skull layered in with the Norman Bates face. That skull might be Norman Bates' mother, whom we see late in the movie. There's another face I find fascinating in this movie. It's the face of the police officer chasing after the Marion Crane character, watching her very carefully. This is the face of law, maybe even justice, but look at those black, dark eyes thanks to those sunglasses. On the one hand, you've got male and female faces, but you've also got the face of law and the face of death. And then you start to mix those 4 faces together. In one moment you have the face of Marion Crane mixed up with the face of the police officer. Later on, of course, I said in the next to last shot, you have the face of death mixed up with Norman Bates. Also has another classic element in it, which is urban landscape, rural environment. Here in this movie, all the people go from the urban environment to the rural area. The place of civilization to the place maybe of half civilization or barbarism. The place where Norman Bates resides is, of course, the hotel and his house next to it. House has been interpreted as a Freudian symbol, 3 different layers. That is, the superego on top, the id in the middle, and the ego in the bottom, which is the basement where you find the Norman Bates mother character. That makes a lot of sense to me, but you remember these characters escaping out into the wilderness of sorts are going to meet something they've never encountered. And that's true of the audience in 1960 as well, which is that Norman Bates is schizophrenic, perhaps multiple personality disorder, certainly a murderer and serial killer who is crazy, who would be in the lunatic asylum or today in some kind of home managed by psychologists and psychiatrists.
But I couldn't allow them to believe that I would commit murder. They'll put him away now, as I should have, years ago.
So at the beginning of the movie, you have the Janet Leigh character end up lying and then stealing. Also having an adulterous affair at the very beginning of the movie. In Roman Catholic Christian terms, that's a sin. By cultural norms at the time, that's also a transgression, I think. We go from lying, stealing, and adultery to murder in the shower scene to by the end, you have the Norman Bates character dressing up as a woman, which is being a transvestite according to the final speech in this movie. But it's more than that. Obviously, it's taking on multiple personalities and becoming a serial killer. And that's the face you stare into by the end of the movie. You've gone from normal perversions or more ordinary ones to ultimately by the end, horrific perversions that people, I think in 1960, a lot of people weren't used to. It's amazing to me that this movie was so popular. People would line up at movie theaters. It made a lot of money. I think that tells you that people, Americans, circa 1960, were pretty weird. And in truth, we've always been pretty weird. You know, you go back to those TV shows of the 1950s and nice, normal families. But we know behind closed doors, no matter what era in human history or civilization, there are perversions and worse perversions. It's part of the thing that Hitchcock is telling us, especially with the Bates Motel. I think one clunky thing about this movie, to me, I could be wrong, but that final speech by the psychiatrist. He tells the people in the police station what's wrong with Norman Bates. It feels like a straightforward speech explaining not just to the characters within that room, but also to an audience in 1960 what's really wrong with Norman. Because my guess is most audience members at the time wouldn't have a clue what's wrong with Norman, don't understand transvesticism, schizophrenia, they haven't read the DSM-1, and they're not used to psychiatric disorders. So you need that speech at the end to tell people what the heck this guy was doing dressed up as an old woman, killing people. I think this would be a more interesting, ambiguous work of art if you didn't have that speech in there, or if you had something in that speech that made it dubious. Now maybe that's the case with this movie, and I missed the dubiousness of this speech or the ambiguity in it. But it feels like an explanatory speech. Anyway, that's the only thing I could find that could be slightly off of this movie. I can see why it was remade shot for shot by Gus Van Sant. I can see why there were sequels. I can see why it is justifiably famous. And if you're interested in probing the darkness of the human heart, which is something you ought to do because you know what? This movie is about you. You have to watch Psycho and seek to understand it. What do you think about this movie? What do you think about this video? Please leave us a comment. And if you haven't, please subscribe to my channel to support what we're doing. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.
It seems she's hurting you. I meant well.
People always mean well. They cluck their thick tongues and shake their heads and suggest oh so very delicately